Charlotte, North Carolina was winding down. The city lights shimmered against the asphalt, cars dwindling as the night pressed in. Downtown buzzed with the last flickers of nightlife, but elsewhere, silence stretched across the streets like a heavy curtain. Barack Ellis, a name known in legal circles across the country, wasn't thinking about courtrooms tonight. He wasn't dwelling on constitutional law or civil rights statutes. Tonight, he was just a man on his way home. He'd spent the evening speaking at a criminal justice reform event. Ironic, given what was about to happen. The moment came as red and blue lights danced in his rearview mirror. Barack sighed, signaling and pulling over. He wasn't speeding. He hadn't rolled through a stop. His black Audi A6 was newly inspected, polished, and spotless. He reached for his wallet and registration with methodical calm. He knew this drill. 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser behind him. Officer Jake Rowley, tall and solid with a buzz cut, took the driver's side. Officer Mason Trent, wiry with sharp eyes and twitchy fingers, flanked the passenger door. Rowley tapped the glass. Barack lowered the window. "License and registration," Rowley said, tone dry. Barack handed them over. "Can I ask why I was pulled over?" Rowley's eyes darted to Trent before answering, "Tail lights out." Barack arched a brow. "That's not possible. My car was inspected 2 days ago. Everything was working." "You calling me a liar?" Trent snapped. "I'm saying I'd like confirmation," Barack replied evenly. He wasn't provoking them. He was simply asking. But they weren't interested in calm or clarity. Rowley's voice turned cold. "Step out of the car." Barack didn't move. "Am I being detained?" "Step now." "Officers, I know my rights. Unless there's probable cause." Rowley yanked the door open before Barack could finish. A harsh hand grabbed his wrist, twisting it. Barack's seatbelt cut into his shoulder as he instinctively resisted. Trent was already at the other side, wrenching his other arm back. "You're resisting arrest," Rowley growled, slamming him against the hood of his own car. Pain radiated through Barack's arms. His heart didn't pound out of fear. It burned with righteous fury. They didn't know who he was. And they didn't care. The holding cell was cold. The concrete bench hard. The lights overhead flickered with a low buzz. Barack sat silently, hands now free but marked from the cuffs. Hours passed without explanation. Eventually, an officer opened the gate. "You made bail." Some lawyer posted it. Barack stood slowly, straightening his blazer. He said nothing, offered no gratitude. He walked out like a man with unfinished business. 3 days later, the halls of Mecklenburg County Courthouse buzzed with their usual gray energy. Clerks pushing files, attorneys pacing with coffee, defendants slumped in chairs. In courtroom 3C, Barack Ellis sat at the defense table, not as a prosecutor, but as a man charged with resisting arrest, obstruction, and disorderly conduct. The irony wasn't lost on him. Beside him was Martin Bell, his court-appointed public defender. Overworked, underpaid, and perpetually sleep-deprived, Bell gave Barack a sideways glance. "You sure you don't want to call your own guy in D.C.? Barack shook his head. "Not yet. Let them play their hand first." At the front, Judge Linda Reeves entered. Known for her no-nonsense demeanor and reputation for favoring law enforcement testimony, her gavel struck with a sharp crack. She didn't even glance at Barack. The prosecutor, Daniel Kraft, stood, smug and confident. "Your Honor, this is a simple case." The defendant escalated a routine traffic stop. He refused lawful orders, became aggressive, and endangered our officers. Barack stared ahead, unmoved. Kraft's words didn't sting. They were lies he'd dismantle one by one. Bell stood. "Objection. There's no footage." The officers' body cams were conveniently not operational. "There is zero evidence of aggression." "Overruled," Judge Reeves said with a wave of her hand, not even lifting her eyes. Barack's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a bad stop. It was a system running on autopilot. And they thought he was just another man too proud to obey. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Barack Ellis sat still, spine straight, eyes forward. The courtroom in Mecklenburg County was stifling, tense and swollen with judgment. Most people in the room didn't recognize him, and those who did couldn't believe what they were seeing. A man known for prosecuting high-profile corruption cases, now shackled by false accusations. At the witness stand, Officer Jake Rowley adjusted his uniform and cleared his throat. The defendant was combative from the beginning, he testified, voice smooth like he'd rehearsed. He refused to exit the vehicle and became physically resistant. We feared for our safety. A few jurors nodded unconsciously. It was the kind of line they'd heard in a dozen cases before. Then came Officer Mason Trent. He backed Rowley's version to the letter. We followed protocol. He was non-compliant, tense, but aggressive. All lies. Well-crafted, confidently delivered, backed by badges and system bias. Barack didn't flinch. Judge Reeves barely lifted her gaze from her bench. Anything else, Mr. Bell? Barack's lawyer stood slowly. He looked exhausted but focused. Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call the defendant to the stand. A wave of murmurs fluttered across the courtroom. The man accused would speak. The man accused would reveal. Barack rose. He took the stand like a seasoned warrior entering a battlefield he knew too well. His hands folded calmly in his lap. He was composed, but inside, decades of frustration and fire pressed against the surface. Prosecutor Daniel Kraft approached, smug confidence in every step. Mr. Ellis, would you agree you refused lawful commands from officers during your stop? Barack didn't blink. I asked why I was being ordered out of my car. That is not illegal. Kraft feigned surprise. So you admit you didn't comply? I admit I asked a legal question, which I had every right to do. Kraft smirked, turned to the jury. And you believe that was appropriate, given the situation? Barack leaned forward, voice calm, but sharp enough to slice tension in two. Before we continue, I think it's important I disclose something. The room froze. Kraft raised an eyebrow, caught off guard. Even Judge Reeves shifted in her seat. Barack reached for his briefcase. Every eye followed his hand. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out a federal badge. He held it up like a mirror to the room's assumptions. My name is Barack Ellis, he said clearly, and I am an assistant United States attorney for the District of Columbia. Time stopped. Kraft's mouth opened, then closed. He stumbled a step back. Judge Reeves visibly stiffened. The officer's bravado melted away like ice in fire. A murmur rippled through the jury box. People in the back leaned in. A reporter's fingers flew across a laptop keyboard. You're a federal prosecutor? Kraft asked, voice faltering. Barack nodded. Yes. I've prosecuted cases of police misconduct and civil rights violations for over a decade. I know this courtroom, and I know exactly what happened the night I was arrested. He placed the badge on the stand in front of him, like evidence. And I know that this case, these lies, could have happened to any black man who didn't have the weight of the federal government behind him. Judge Reeves' lips thinned into a hard line. She tried to compose herself, but the power balance had shifted, and the courtroom knew it. Barack turned his gaze to her. Your Honor, I request the dispatch logs from the night of my arrest. If these officers claimed a broken taillight, there should be a call. If not, they violated procedure and fabricated their reason for the stop. Kraft objected, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. Judge Reeves looked like she'd swallowed a stone. After a long pause, she cleared her throat. Request granted. Trent twitched. Rowley exhaled sharply, color draining from his face. They knew what was coming. Outside the courthouse, the first headlines broke. Federal prosecutor arrested in Charlotte under false charges. Assistant U.S. Attorney reveals identity mid-trial, exposes officers. Twitter exploded. News vans pulled up outside the courthouse steps. Civil rights groups shared video clips, footage secretly taken by a college student in the gallery. The moment Barack Ellis pulled out his badge went viral. Hashtag Justice for Ellis began to trend nationwide. Inside, however, the silence was louder than the buzz beyond those walls. Barack returned to the defense table, expression unreadable. Bell looked at him like he was seeing a legend in the flesh. Kraft sat frozen. Rowley and Trent whispered to each other, pale and stiff. Judge Reeves sat behind her bench, not as a ruler of the courtroom, but as a witness to something much bigger than herself. Barack wasn't just defending his name anymore. He was cracking open a system built on impunity. The moment Barack Ellis revealed his badge had already echoed far beyond the walls of Mecklenburg County Courthouse. What began as a local trial had mutated into a national flashpoint. Within hours, cable news anchors dissected every detail. By morning, Barack's name was on every major outlet's homepage. Federal prosecutor wrongfully arrested in Charlotte. Justice system under fire after USA exposes police in open court. Charlotte officers face scrutiny in explosive trial turnaround. But while the headlines exploded, the chessboard inside the courthouse had changed forever. Inside the courtroom, Judge Linda Reeves sat behind her bench, posture rigid, gavel untouched. Her robe no longer gave her the comfort of control. It felt heavy, like it clung to her skin. Her mind raced with implications. This wasn't just another case anymore. If she dismissed the dispatch logs, if she ruled against a man with federal credentials and national backing, it wouldn't be a trial. It would be a scandal. Her name would be tethered to it forever. Across the room, Prosecutor Daniel Kraft sat hollow-eyed. His hands shuffled paperwork he no longer believed in. His polished confidence had dulled to fear. And the officers, Rowley and Trent, sat frozen. Their eyes darted nervously every time the door opened, every time someone whispered behind them. Their facade was gone, replaced by sweat, silence, and shame. 2 days later, the dispatch logs were submitted. There had been no call, no report, no probable cause for the stop. The prosecution tried to spin. Kraft claimed it was a communication error. But it was too late. The logs were time-stamped, verified, ironclad. The defense requested a review of all body cam footage from that shift. The officers' units, it turned out, had no active recording due to malfunction, a pattern that now raised red flags. Barack leaned toward Bell. "They're unraveling," he said quietly. Bell nodded, disbelief in his voice. This is a system quake. By now, the court gallery was packed each session, not with bystanders, but with history's witnesses. Activists stood outside with signs reading, "No justice without truth." If he hadn't been a prosecutor, he'd be a statistic. "This is why we march." The local newspaper uncovered that Judge Reeves had previously dismissed over a dozen complaints of unlawful stops, mostly involving black drivers. An anonymous leak from within the police department provided damning evidence. Emails between officers discussing how to create justifiable stops. Internal memos urging higher interaction quotas. At least 5 more drivers falsely cited during the same week as Barack's stop. The internet flooded with stories of similar encounters, victims who hadn't been prosecutors, who didn't get the chance to fight back. One young man posted, "They did this to me 2 years ago. I filed a complaint. Nothing happened. Watching Ellis tear them down gave me back my voice." Barack didn't speak publicly, not yet, but his silence amplified the message. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was letting the truth carry itself. The mayor of Charlotte issued a statement promising a full review. The chief of police held a press conference but stumbled under questions. The governor of North Carolina was asked about the case during a national interview. He replied, "It's a serious concern when even a federal prosecutor can't trust the system." Meanwhile, Judge Reeves convened with judicial ethics advisors behind closed doors. The weight of national scrutiny pressed in. She had built a career on control. Now it was all unraveling. Barack returned home to find letters piled high outside his door. Letters from veterans. Letters from single mothers. Letters from high school students who had watched his testimony in class. One read, "You stood up and made them see us. Thank you." But Barack didn't be asking it. He couldn't. Because behind every thank you, he saw a name. The case. A statistic. Someone who hadn't walked away. He sat alone in the dark that night, staring at the badge on his desk, not with pride, but with the haunting realization that if he hadn't had that badge, he wouldn't be sitting at all. The final days of the trial felt electric. Reporters lined the hallway. Protesters chanted outside. But inside the courtroom, the silence was suffocating. The jurors watched with widened eyes. Judge Reeves' gavel remained untouched, like she was afraid of the sound it might make. Barack sat still, calm on the outside. Inside, a storm. But it wasn't for himself anymore. It was for the system he had spent his career trying to believe in. He wasn't just defending his innocence now. He was exposing the truth. The courtroom felt different now. Gone was the easy indifference that had hung in the air during the early days of the trial. In its place was a stifling awareness, a gravity that held every breath hostage. The world was watching. Judge Linda Reeves entered with practiced composure, but anyone paying attention could see it, the tension in her jaw, the hesitation in her step. The gavel, which once struck with casual authority, now remained untouched. She scanned the room, not with control, but with calculation. She wasn't just deciding a verdict today. She was choosing a side of history. The room fell silent as Judge Reeves cleared her throat. Papers shuffled beneath her hand, but her fingers paused at the top of the stack. She looked down at Barack Ellis, who sat as he had throughout the trial, quiet, composed, unflinching. After reviewing the evidence, including testimony, dispatch logs, and the absence of probable cause, she hesitated, only for a breath, but in that pause the world held still. The court finds the defendant. Barack didn't move. His pulse didn't race. He didn't need to hear it to know the truth. Not guilty. A wave swept through the courtroom. Relief, vindication, disbelief. It wasn't applause, but the sound of justice gasping for air after being held underwater for too long. Barack stayed seated, eyes forward. Because this wasn't a celebration. It was confirmation. The silence shattered when Judge Reeves raised her voice again. Furthermore, this court is forwarding all relevant materials, including officer testimony, dispatch records, and internal documents, to the North Carolina State Attorney's Office for immediate review. Officer Rowley's face drained of color. Officer Trent's fingers twitched against the table. Prosecutor Kraft looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was a signal flare. The behavior of these officers and the circumstances surrounding this case warrant further investigation at the state and potentially federal level, Reeves added, her voice tight with strain. For the first time, she looked at Barack like he wasn't just a name on a docket, but a mirror reflecting everything she didn't want to see. The courtroom emptied into chaos, reporters shouting questions, camera flashes cutting through the air, activists chanting outside. No badge above the law. If not for the ID, he'd be in a cell. Truth won't stay silent. But Barack walked quietly through it all. His lawyer, Martin Bell, gave him a pat on the back. "You did it, man." Barack shook his head. "We exposed it. That's all. The rest is up to them." He turned his gaze toward the courthouse steps, where crowds gathered, holding up signs not just with slogans, but with faces. People who never got their moment. Never had their truth believed. Never walked out free. That night, Barack stood alone in his apartment, staring at his badge. It used to symbolize justice. Now it symbolized something heavier, survival. Because without it, he might have become a name on a list. Another victim, another hashtag, another voice erased. But he had survived. And now, he had a responsibility. His phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from journalists, law firms, civil rights leaders. But one message stood out. A text from a stranger. "You don't know me, but I was arrested in Charlotte 5 years ago for the same thing. I lost everything. Watching you fight back gave me hope again." Barack didn't reply. He didn't need to. The trial was over, but the story wasn't. Barack Ellis had lit a fuse that couldn't be extinguished. His case had become a turning point, a rallying cry, a question asked of every system, every courtroom, every badge. What happens when the people we trust with justice abuse that trust? What happens when the wrong man gets the right platform? What happens when the system is finally forced to see itself? This wasn't about winning. This was about revealing. Because if I, someone with a badge and a title, could be treated like that, what happens to the people with no badge, no lawyer, no name? This is not the end. It's only the beginning. And now that the truth is out, no one's looking away.